Hello, everybody. So this is the third video lecture on the chapter of childbirth and the newborn. And in this one, I'm going to cover some of the potential problems with the newborn and some of the characteristics. In the last slide, we were talking about, or I was talking about medical considerations, things just to keep in mind as you might potentially be dealing with or considering labor and delivery. So this slide represents some of the potential problems is the term the textbook used. So some of the things that can kind of go wrong. This first one, I should have checked this spelled the pronunciation out. Naoxia, right? Which is a term for a baby with a lack of oxygen in the blood, which assumes that there's lack of oxygen getting to the brain. This can lead to brain damage. It can lead to brain death. I believe your textbook references if a baby has low birth weight and this anoxa, I think would be a pronunciation that predicts later cognitive developments. I mean, ultimately your brain needs a lot of oxygen. So if a baby doesn't get it in these early stages, cells start to die, and that's very bad. Another term or another complication is low birth weight. So you can be born, and I think it's on the next slide, small for date. So low birth weight is considered less than 5 pounds, 8 ounces is your official low birth weight. About 8% of babies, one of the troubles with being just small, right, at birth is you have difficulty regulating your body temperature. This is considered generally a preventable state for the baby. It may be associated with mother's smoking behavior. She didn't eat enough, stress, but it is considered to be like a generally, if everything else is right and the baby just happens to be small, it's something that could have been prevented. You have a term called preterm. Sometimes we hear it described as a preemie baby. So preemie babies are less than 37 weeks. 38 weeks is considered, 40 weeks is term. But anywhere between 37 and 40 weeks is not considered. So it has to be less than 37 weeks is what I'm trying to say. Often babies will end up in the neonatal intensive care unit or the NICU. That's what you have here. You have a little bitty baby who's plugged up to all of these sensors, and they're in an incubator. The incubators are typically like temperature controlled. There's some sound sort of muffling, but they also are filled with oxygen dense air. With preemie babies, their lungs may not be fully developed, so having availability of oxygen readily available is easier for them to breathe, to get the oxygen they need, because as we've already talked about, lots of challenges can come, lots of troubles can come with not having enough oxygen. This baby appears to be hooked up to some heart monitors. There's probably some blood pressure monitors here. This one in their nose could be oxygen, but it could also be a feeding tube. My baby was in a NICU for, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 days, and he had a tube that went in right here in his neck, and it went straight down into his, I want to say it went to his heart, but that doesn't make any sense to me now. But he wasn't able to, he was getting nutrients that way. That doesn't make any sense. I want to say it went to his heart, but now I'm confused. Anyway, that's a whole another story. Some other problems, you have small for date, and this is a baby. So what this refers to, and it's considered a very serious problem. The risks of death are quite high for babies who should be within this range and are 90%. Or are in the 10th percentile. So that's what this chart here has. Over here you have grams. I wish I would have bothered to convert it. And weeks. And so children who are born in this range right here are considered to be of normal weight. Children who are born in here, so if they are, say, at 36 weeks, all the way up to 1,700 grams would be considered small for weight. So it is what is normal for a baby at that particular stage in development. You're considered small for weight if you if you weigh less than 90%. So you might be a low birth weight baby, but not be considered small for date because you're not less than. On the other hand, you also have children who are large, who are very large for their gestational age. And this is not the same kind of problem, but it can also indicate like it can be very difficult to deliver. A baby like this, it could be a sign of maybe gestational diabetes, of other sort of conditions. Babies that are allowed to stay in the womb more than 42 weeks are considered post-term. So I mentioned that neither of mine were natural, went into spontaneous labor, but the second one was because she was past her due date. I want to say she was induced only 4 days, which doesn't seem like very much. I was very much past my due date. I was due on Halloween and I came 17 days later. That would not go today. Doctors wouldn't have let my mother go today. And the risk is because the placenta, you'll remember, which is so nutrient dense and effectively nourishes the baby, the placenta is not intended to be an organ around forever. It has a duration of 40 weeks. So it kind of starts to wear out after a period of time. So you want to get the baby out when the placenta is still feeding and nourishing and still in good health because it's an organ too. And then another risk is being born stillborn. And this is defined as the death to a fetus that is 20 weeks or more. And so a stillbirth can be a fetus that dies at 22 weeks, 23, 30 weeks, or a baby that dies during the delivery. That's also considered a stillbirth. Happens in about a little bit less than 1% of births are considered stillbirths, about 26,000 a year, or what does it say, 1 every 20 minutes. Okay, I think this is a really interesting diagram. If you've been in my human growth and development, I have this diagram in there too, a little bit different version. But what it represents is the relative ratio of the head to the rest of the body. So, like you have down here at the end, well, according to your textbooks, kind of jumped ahead, but according to the textbooks, a baby in the womb's head is 50% of its length, which is kind of interesting to think about, right? Because we think of, it's just kind of interesting to think about how disproportionate we are. At birth, the head is about 25%. So that's what this is supposed to represent, is you have a 1-year-old, their head is disproportionately larger to the rest of their body. And as we age, we become an adult, our head is only 6% of the rest of our body. This is actually a thing that sociologists use to indicate the cultural attitudes towards children. Because what they notice that as in art, children are not represented with this wacky, disproportionate, but at different times in history, art shows children as just being short adults with the same head proportion. And sociologists argue that that's a reflection of the way our culture thought about children, is they didn't really see children as being different, because if they saw children as being different, then they would have drawn them to look different. But when we illustrate children in our culture to be the same proportion as adults. Anyway, so I just think this is an interesting thing to think about, is how, and now when I see babies, that's what I think. I notice like their head really is pretty big. The average baby size. This could be an exam quiz question. It is in my other class. What's the average baby? About 7.5 pounds, about 20 inches. The brain weighs about 25% at this point. Your textbook does not go into a discussion about neural pruning, and what's interesting about the brain at this point in our development is there are all kinds of neural connections. There are more neural connections in the early part of our life than there are later on, and it boils down to, it's like a use it or lose it kind of thing. And the neurons that we use will get stronger and will continue, we call those, and create these neural pathways. And then over the ones that we don't use, they'll sort of wither away and die. And then there's also an interesting discussion in your textbook about what babies look like, that they're not really very attractive, and young parents may not be prepared for the fact that babies are kind of ugly, that they got this funky, misshapen head. They might look a little bit like aliens, depending upon how long they've been in the birth canal. They're going to be kind of coated with this fur and this like waxy, whitish, kind of gross kind of stuff, and maybe smears of blood, and they might like look kind of purple because because of the way the oxygen is. They might have some bruises if they've had forceps on there, or because like squeezing through the birth canal, there's bones in there. That's that's pretty traumatic experience. Their genitals might be kind of elongated. They might look like, yeah, they're not real pretty when they come out. And so what your textbook highlights is that this is important to know. This is good for parents to understand, that the babies that we see in the pictures or that ain't what it looks like, ain't what it looks like when they're first born. And I think that's also fair. Okay, I'm going to stop here because it's been 10 minutes. I only got one slide left, so the next lecture will probably be pretty short.